Also editing and editor from the translator's perspective. Let me try to explain this name. This is the perspective, the viewpoint, and from the subjective viewpoint of the translator as of one of the participants of a large process. And it is from my own experience, and in the English version you have the articles, the translator. And the viewpoint, the perspective, I hope will be useful and interesting for you. As for experience, it is worth mentioning that we will be speak about cooperation with agencies and about literary translation of literature. How the translator sees the editor. On the emotional level, he sees the editor in the same way. And no passion in the world is equal to the passion to alter someone else's draft, said Herbert Wells once. Maybe everybody had a rather injuring experience, bad experience, when you really could feel who is an editor, when you work very hard, and the text is crisscrossed with red color. And some people are perplexed, are shocked, are in panic, and some people you create certain images. And usually we have a reaction which was created from our school years. We try to defend ourselves, but then we just gain experience, and we understand that there are some professional truths, that nobody is perfect. The editor is not our competitor, is not our enemy. An editor is our partner. But sometimes situations arise when these postulates are disproved again, and we have to discover these postulates once again. And we try to to make this difficult case easier, and we try to make it as useful as possible. Let us try to make it useful. Why do we do it? Why do we have to cooperate with the editor? Yes, it's obvious. The answer is obvious. We have to. This is the way our world functions, and life is not perfect. If we have to, it must be useful. And if it is unavoidable, then what will I have from this counteraction, from this cooperation? And I want to, as an editor, I want to have high quality product and good relations with my client, and I want to be authority, to have authority with my client. And sometimes we may lose it, and let us still let us work with positive terminology, high quality product. So translator and editor work together, and they work in team. And as for editor, the editor catches my mistakes, corrects my mistakes, and also helps me to look at the translation with fresh from the another perspective, and he tells me how can I improve my translation. Another thing which is not as important, but still it is important. We have to learn. It is a life learning, and we have to learn all our life. And in my experience, learning training from editor takes an important place, especially when I was starting beginning my career. We must gain professional growth. We must learn from our own mistakes. And what happens in this work? Well, this is a light version. When we learn from our mistakes, it's just a kind of a training, and it's not very it doesn't cause so many injuries. And also we learn new things from the feedback, from corrections, from commenters, and we can also find out new terminology sources or new rules. I believed, or you believed you knew, you've been you have known from school, but it turns out that you haven't. And also you work, sometimes you work intuitionally and mechanically, and the editor corrects it, and then you think whether it is useful, and you think over it and analyze it, and you have to clarify it for the editor and for yourself. Also, it is rather important aspect, and it can be placed on the put on the first place. And from the linguistic point, and from the point of the person who earns this way, relations with clients are really very important. So we work for a client, and of course it's very painful for me when some editor shows me that I didn't do my work properly and professionally. The editor helps. Editors help us in, and we editor helps us to strengthen our authority when he gives us back our translation with corrections. Even if you have arguments, still the way you solve your problems and you solve these arguments, you can also show yourself as a reliable person and a good professional, or vice versa. Well, these are the main factors I enumerate here. There is also another factor which is also very important. It's our ego. It's our sense of ego, because everybody has ego, and people do not like to be criticized. They do not like to feel defense, and they don't like to have the feeling when they are severely criticized, when somebody dominates over them, and it can bother us. But still, we are going to have about professional aspects of work. And next question, next issue: how do we cooperate with an editor? How the process is organized with the when two parties just participate in it, editor and translator. There are three scenarios, three types of scenario. First, when you give the translation and you do not see the editor, you receive your text edited. So this scenario is not interested. And interested scenario is a classical scenario. I think it is the most widespread scenario, and I consider it is really interesting. It's when edited translation is given back to translator for the so-called validation. So when you agree with editor's corrections. It is the case when you have to work with editing from the last. The case when you work with editing from the last client, and it is an interesting scenario. First of all, in this case, the editor is your colleague, and your colleague is also a translator. Sometimes it is your peer, and the agency can give you an editor who is in this topic, and usually an editor is also a person, the same person as you, and you can also edit his translation or her translation next time. And when you work at the text, the translator plays the main role, the key role, and the translator is responsible for the quality of the translation, but also the qualification of the translator. The translator must be qualified, and the editor must not supervise and this is the position of the agency who and the agencies use this scheme of works, this algorithm of work. And now we come to the main topic of our presentation. What kind of editors exist? Let me remind you. We talk about the translator's perspective. They are separated into three categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly. Good editor. Who is a good editor from the translator's viewpoint? Maybe the person who doesn't do lots of corrections, but the good editor will correct as it is needed, as much as it is needed, and corrections the editor makes have to be correct. He catches mistakes and corrects mistakes. If the editor makes additional corrections, so these corrections are constructive, and they are aimed at the improvement of the translation.
And it's not compulsory that a good editor hit the point and does everything correct. Of course, the translator also has a final stage, and this is the constructive approach is the keyword here. And of course, it's very good, and it kind of bonus when the editor makes comments on his or her corrections. Good redactor is our allies. He helps us to prepare the quality product, to improve the quality, raises the quality. So if the translation is not really bad, is not really good, then editor makes it better, much better, etc. And of course, a good editor, we can teach, we can learn a lot from the good editor. And of course, he raises your authority, and it raises your authority when you get your work back from the editor without the minor number of corrections. And of course, your ego is happy about that. The client, of course, understands that you are very good as a translator because the editor did not really good. And if there are lots of corrections, of course, it's not really pleasant. On one hand, we have a very good editor, and the number of the corrections, the number of comments gives us the idea that our ego is not satisfied, and the client can have doubts about your abilities and skills. Probably the editor gave the response, the feedback, and probably the translator doesn't know about that, and we should do with this. Very often agency asks to make comments on the corrections, and if it is not done, you should ask it. You should use your own initiative to ask about the corrections, and you can get the summary, the brief summary about the nature, how much you confirm, how much you reject, what kind of improvements were made, etc., etc. To identify the global mistakes, the critical mistakes, for example. So the agency which does not know the language, they think that, for example, it's very, very bad translation. If there are corrections, of course, errors, you should just agree with them, and you should if really didn't use spell checker, for example. How to identify this? Of course, self-criticism is very good, but it should have limits. First of all, you should say sorry for the excess number of mistakes, errors, etc., and you should probably add the reasons why is that. And I think you shouldn't justify yourself, and you shouldn't be sorry, be sad, and to tell all the reasons, to disclose all the reasons to the agency. Of course, if it happens, just think it, but to assault, to fight with editor, because I made them because you didn't give me any glossary, etc., etc. Of course, you may mention it, but please be correct. So, and correct is the characteristic feature of the professional. To make conclusions, this is our second achievement here, and please don't forget to thank. Second type of editor is bad, and how can we identify him? Here is evil in the translation, and this editor tries to imply his own style and rewrite the translation for him, and he gives the comments. They are not really critical, they are not on the issue, and then really can be offensive. And this is just a mirror view of the good editor. Of course, he knows his business, he knows what he does, and it connects him to the good editor. He finds mistakes, he finds errors, and he corrects them, and probably if he had this job he could do it better than the translator, but when he or she uses its taste and it he doesn't want to admit the ratio, the reason, etc., etc. Probably he's not really evil, he's not really bad. Probably he does not understand his role in the team. Probably he uses some ideals. Probably he set very, very high goals for himself. Probably he is not able to edit, and he just rewrite the text and translate it from the scratch. And but still, we're translators. We had to cooperate. We have to cooperate with such editors. We cannot call them liars. We cannot learn anything professional from, anything good professional from. About the clients, about the authority for a client, we cannot speak about that because we have to protect ourselves. It has the potential to improve our translation, but he can destroy it completely. depends on what quality our translation has had in the beginning. What should we do? Should we do with the translation, with the corrections? I think that here we have the audience, the high professionals here, and I don't think that this connected, it can be related to anybody. But if some no-name translator asked what should I do in such a situation, I could reply that, sorry person, just calm down, think about your ego, and probably this is not the editor's fault, and he is not really bad and evil, and probably your translation is not really good. Well, I had such cases. I don't think that the audience here had such cases. And next, we're going to differentiate bad corrections from the good corrections. We're going to confirm the good references, corrections, sorry, and reject the bad ones. We're also here. So we also have almost always have comments on the corrections, but good editor can make comments, bad can make non-constructive, evil editor can make non-constructive comments, and I had, from my editor's experience, I think that it is enough to correct it, and the person will see your corrections and will understand everything, but it does not always work. How we should respond to that? Of course, we cannot just leave it unattended. Of course, we should pay attention, the client's attention, to this problem. And in this critical response, we should think about the limits, about our correctness. And if the editor tells personal insults or offenses, you shouldn't oppose him. You just should inform the client that such situation happens, or involve the third party, independent party. And I used to be the third party, and I was an editor. There's such a method, and of course these cases take time, and it's a kind of we should consider this as a kind of investments into our relations with the client, and we shouldn't save this time. We should spend this time, and we should show our position and prove. And if this situation has a repeated character, so you may refuse to cooperate with such editor, showing that you cannot collaborate properly. So ugly or bad editor, he is not qualified, he is not in position. Probably everybody meets such a type of editor. Fortunately, it's not really often. And as a translators, you're interested in things, and all the progressive humanity should put their forces to reduce the number of bad editors, to assist them to probably switch on to other industries, or of course to comment and to explain the client that what happened and what we should do. And of course it takes time, and we should consider this as a kind of investment. And of course, probably you understood that in this qualification we have good and bad and evil, and probably we have bad and evil, or we don't have kind. A kind editor probably makes less corrections and can add a compliment to you, and of course it's very pleasant for your ego. And sometimes it depends on the person. Probably he is very professional, but on the other hand he can be a lazy person who didn't pay much attention, enough attention to your translation. So in the long-term perspective and long-term perspective, it can really impact on your quality. I don't know who wrote complaints for good editors, but I had a client who asked the translators to fill the form to assess the work of the editors. And why I had to, because now he changed from the classical schemes. Now he tries to save money and probably switch to the zero type of editing. So structuring the editors when they work with the agencies, we should consider the client's scenario. The last scenario, they have the processes of the editing validation in the frameworks, the shape of your cooperation with the agency, and then it goes to the final to the client, and after that it is the client gives your translation with the corrections, and the agency gives it to you. Or I don't work with using such scheme. And here you can see the structure, why it is it different from other schemes. Here the agency usually asks to confirm the taste corrections. The client knows what he needs, and this is our idea, and he has the rights to get what he wants and what he paid for. There are some corrections, for example, the names of the companies, the offices, the work structure, because we may not know how to translate it properly, how it is approved in the client. Style guides, special jargon, some corporate slogans, non-standard phrases, some stylistical requests, some spelling requests, for example, to write something with capital letters, the names of the offices, the jobs, etc. One international association wanted that every word should be written with a capital letter, and fortunately I was lucky to not to do it. And at the same time they ask to correct mistakes which were corrected, or which made the editor, why did he make these errors? He probably made the corrections, but it changed the meaning, and you should put attention. You should attention to it.
And also consistency. If this editor can correct one term on one page and thinks it is enough, but this mistake is repeated in the whole text, so the text must be consistent and he must correct every page. But there is no direct borderline between these categories, and they are all together, and the slogans. For example, if you have the slogans and they are grammatically incorrect, then what should you do? If it is the mistake is only in slogan, so maybe a term is used, or the wrong word is used, okay, let it be only in this slogan. But if you face with the same very mistake along the whole text, so everything must be consistent, and how to reach this result, how to do it. What is characteristic feature of such editor? This editor, as a client's representative, he knows the sphere, the subject area, and he knows the subject of your translation, of the translation you work with. But not being a linguist, he does not manage the words, and he can make mistakes in style, in grammar, and in spelling. And the zone of responsibility can be separated, can be divided, and the agency can also act as an editor. And sometimes conflicts arise either in the so-called gray zone, or when the editor doesn't know the border of his powers, of what is allowed. And also, as for tastes, editors' tastes, and also should be taken into consideration. So tastes differ, the taste of translator and the taste of editor. And luckily the agency is on my side, and the agency has to explain that explains the rights of the worker. And I had cases when, for example, sometimes I got the request of the client, and I was told, just do what you are told to do, what you are ordered to do, and forget about it. They do not understand what they are doing. And if the agency does not support you, and they trust to another specialist. Wow, this is a problem, but it is not our topic, the topic of our speech. And remember, if the client wants to improve the text according to his or her taste, he will do it, he or she will do it, your client will do it. It's the right of the client. And even if you have no editorial corrections from your client. And for example, I just transcreated for a large brand, jewelry brand, and there are 3 variations, commands, and I made my translations, and I was paid for my time, for the time I spent. And once I faced with a glossy magazine, and I opened it, and I saw the text I was translating, I was working at, and everything in this text was written with a capital letter. Wow, what should I do? I had to put up with it. Our business is to try to satisfy the client and to do everything in our power to persuade the client if the client made a mistake in a text. Another specification of this translations, there is a widespread situation when you are sent a translation, and you tell the agency about the glossary and references, and the agency says, we have no client's glossary, no references. Do everything in your power, and you have to look for sites, you have to make a research, and you try to do your best. You request for glossaries, and you get no answers. and you have a time limit. Your time is limited, and when you send your translation, the translation was edited, and when then your translation is sent back to you with with a number of corrections on the first page, and you feel a protest. How can you correct me? And but if the editor sees mistakes, certainly he corrects these mistakes. And in such situations, I just tell myself, if my client doesn't want to provide me with glossaries, maybe he thinks that such moments may arise in the future, and we will settle the conflict situations post factum. Due to editing, in such cases, uh, uh, I give my command that I couldn't know about clients' preferences, and I just sent back to the agency a letter that I couldn't know clients' preferences. I used to translate corporative ballot, and I faced with the same situation. There is nothing special. There is a usual corporative business text, but still this text tells us about innovations, about improvements made made in production, and it is described within with the help of certain terminology, and I had to analyze this terminology. And also, the text told about the improvements in polygraphy on the cans. And also the text enumerated a number of positions, and I wasn't provided with any glossaries. And but still, let us think: is it possible to make a wide range glossary? No, we should have a special translator for that. And this translator should work for many years. And when I was sent this material, I translated the first copy of this newspaper. I conducted my research, and I made my translation. I was in a time within some days. My translation was sent back to me, full of corrections. I analyzed these corrections. I also made my glossary. I call this retrospective glossary, which is formed with the help of attempts and mistakes. And I was sent back the second newspaper, and also there were lots of corrections, a little bit fewer, but still quite a lot. And they addressed to me for the third time, and I was busy at that time, and I tried to refuse. I said that I was busy because I was doing another work, and they called me back saying that I was given a week, and the client agreed to give me a week more. And in this way, we settle the conflicts, we perform our tasks, we improve the product, we create a quality product, and we learn, we gain new knowledge, and the client gets used to us, to our style, and we also get used to working with our client, with this particular person, and we learn from each other, and this cooperation also gives its positive results. And we have a little time. We may analyze an example of a successful case. This case is really successful. It was a translation into Russian. It was agreement, a secrecy agreement, and it was a translation for Middle Asian, for Asian country, and it was legal translation. And you can see, for example, the word of some words. I try to choose the best equivalent, and my text was a little bit corrected. While I accepted this correction, they also added other corrections. They unified according to their own style. Some words were crossed out. For example, to tell the data was just for some word combinations, such as to tell the data was changed for another word combinations, and there was.
Yes, it's here. He explains the comments, and he explains the essence of the corrections, and Roman explains, gave the comment on that what corrections were made and why they were made, and his reactions. Here, I replied that the first correction was preferential one, and I suggested my own variant option. And here again, Roman highlights the idea that the correction wasn't grammatically correct, and again, Roman gives the example of the correction. I don't know who was the editor who proofread my translation, so my job to correct the mistakes, and I gave the comment that the correction wasn't really good, and I rejected such correction. And again, my comments were taken into account, and there were another option of correction, but this correction was not correct regarding the meaning of the source document. So when I had to write, and I won here in this duel, and they got the quality. And here I would like to finish. This postgraph: nobody is friend or foe to you, but every person is a very great teacher. It is called this. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you very good editors and good correction process. Thank you very much to organizers, to the possibility to present my speech here. Thank you very much for people. And my separate gratitude to the editors who helped me to create this presentation, and it was really useful to me when I tried to prepare it, and I thought about that, and it's really helped me. And when I do my editing job, I do it reasonably. Thank you very much, Roman, and we're sure that your presentation will be useful, And if you have questions, you can ask any language, because we have a simultaneous interpretation team. I have the following question. The editors are from translation, journalism, and there could be an editor from the creative writing, from the literature. If you know the origin of your editor, can you easily work with all the types of these origins, or you should work with the editor who knows the target language or who knows the source language, and who has the special experience? So in my practice, all these steps in the publishing industry, as the translator, I'm not connected with this industry, and I, of course, don't have some special rules, and probably I work with proof readers or editors. They do it, they correct it, check it with the source text, and this is the first cycle. And this, I don't know the origin of the editors I work with, I cooperate with. For those who I know about, all these are translators, former translators, and it's easy to work with them. We exchange our jobs, and I mentioned that sometimes they edit my translation, sometimes we change roles and I do that, etc. Any other questions? So one of them is a doctor, medical translation. Very good, so good translator and editor. So very often we don't know who edits our translation. I have one editor who sends me corrected, edited version, and probably he has the paper, or he printed and he uses pen, and he marks with pen, then scan it. And can you imagine that really it is quite an old school practice? A person with a glass of cognac near the fireplace sits, and I try to understand what does these signs mean, what do these signs mean, and after that I need all these corrections, transfer all these correction signs, and of course it depends what I confirm and what I can reject.